Hi folks, one of the core tools we use to accomplish layout tasks with CSS are floats. And floats allow you, allow you to do a lot of things, but one of their more sort of core purposes is allow you to position an image on a page and then to wrap text around it. Like I've done here on this a blog that I have. Here we floated an image to the left and wrapped text around it to the right. But we could also do a similar thing in this post here, we floated an image to the right and wrapped text around it to the left. So let's figure out, let's see how we do that in CSS. So we haven't actually talked about images yet, so instead of using an image, I'm just using a div, which I've set a width and a height to, and set a background of blue, and then put a margin in it to a bunch of margins, and then set the opacity 2.3, just so that you can sort of see what's going on behind the div. It'll matter in a bit, but it won't matter now. Then below that I have two paragraphs, just with some lorem ipsum generated, blank text. That this is often used to do layout before you actually have real content that you need to put on the page. As you can see, paragraphs and divs are, of course, they're block level elements, and by default they just stack on top of each other. But what we're trying to do here, of course, is to make the text not stack. We want the text to actually wrap around our our div. So what we can do then is if we just put float left, and then you can see that the text is now wrapping. And one thing you may notice here, it's a subtle effect, but something to be aware of when you start doing some floating, is of course to put probably a margin on your divs or your images, so that it doesn't wrap up right next to the text. Because if you don't do that, it starts looking really ugly like this. See, so make sure to add in a margin. So here we floated it left, right, the div left, but we can also float it right, like so. And of course the margins that I had set for the floating it left are no longer working, so I would have to reset these, but let's just put it back left. So floats are pretty simple when it comes to these easier tasks that you're trying to accomplish with them. But there is one thing to be aware of that you'll run across even with simple floating. Let's take out this paragraph, for example, and we'll see how things get more complicated. Notice that when I take out this paragraph, the footer is also just going up the web page too. And we don't want that to happen. We want to keep it below the floated image. And so what you do is if you add the clear property and then clear both like that, this effectively stops the footer from wrapping up around the floated div. So another way to think about this is when you apply a float to an item, it's signaling to the content that's below it to start wrapping around it, as this paragraph has done. But if there's a circumstance in which you want to float some material, or you want some material to wrap, like this paragraph, but not the footer, then you need to apply clear both. And look, if we have put the clear both up here, then the paragraph effectively doesn't recognize the float either. But in these circumstances, we do want our paragraphs to wrap around the float.